Welcome to the Devil's Lettuce podcast, Conversations about Cannabis. My name is Julie. I work for Helios Therapeutics, a medicinal cannabis company here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is not a platform about Helios. In fact, it's not legal for me to talk about our products in any great detail. This started as an idea for people who are using medicinal cannabis to share their stories with others. We know there are a lot of people out there who are interested in using cannabis-based medicines, and that access for many reasons is really difficult. They don't know how to access it. Doctors have told them it's not possible. It's expensive. They don't know where to go. There's a lot of stigma. So we're going to talk to some brave souls who are willing to share their stories in the hope of helping others. Feel free to get in contact directly on devilslettuce@helios.com if you want to tell your story, if you have any questions or suggest topics that we can cover here in later episodes. I have a disclaimer here, which is that this information is for informational and educational purposes only. Any products and information presented during this podcast are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or sickness. All information on the podcast is not meant to substitute for any professional advice from your doctor or ongoing medical treatment you currently receive. Consult with your doctor before using medicinal cannabis. My guest today is Zach Nichols, and he goes by the Green Baron on YouTube, if you want to find him there. He's been using medicinal cannabis for a few years. He's had some conditions his whole life, and he's 19, so he's quite young, but he's very experienced with medicinal cannabis, and it really has helped him to overcome all sorts of things, and he's got a very interesting perspective for a young man. So today my guest is Zach Nichols, aka the Green Baron. We will talk about that later. But Zach, great to have you with me. Thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah.
And let's dive straight in, and it'd be great for you to, tell us a bit about who you are, but also the conditions that you suffer from and how you use medicinal cannabis to treat those.
Yeah. So, as you said, my name's Zach. I've been sort of experimenting and using medical cannabis for the last few years to help treat a couple of main conditions that I have, two of which are like mental health related issues. So I've struggled with depression and anxiety issues pretty much my entire life. And then I also have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, making me relatively flexible, but also giving me a lot of joint pain and issues with relaxing and sleeping and everything.
So multiple things, and we often hear that from people who use cannabis, right? Is there's multiple things. Have you had the joint syndrome your whole life, or did that develop later?
Well, I've most likely had it my entire life. But being a young, stupid kid, I would move my body and flex my body and think it's awesome. Everyone wanted to show off my cool abilities and party tricks and stuff. But I didn't sort of realize that it was like an issue until later on in life, sort of when I started getting into my late teens, that I started realizing that I was getting like pain from this, and sort of sourced to a lot of issues that I was facing through like body health and everything.
Sure. And was that also related to the mental health issues, or were those separate?
So the mental health issues came through a lot of different things, mostly through young in school, experiencing a lot of bullying, so it's a rough sort of space to be in, younger years of school, and everyone's quite judgy, and there's no that adult filter that we develop over our growing up and formative years.
I can tell you that, and we should say, you're young, you're 19. I can tell you, unfortunately, it may not get better. So bullying can still happen.
It's definitely gotten better. It's a lot better. A lot of people pick their words a bit better.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Maybe that's it. It's thinking about what they say before it just comes out of their mouths. And so you said just in your intro, you've been experimenting with medical cannabis for some time. So how did you first kind of come across it?
Well, I have very relatively young parents, so they're very onto a lot of new news and everything. They're quite welcoming to new information. And I first probably heard about medical cannabis when I was very young. I lived in Australia for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
So while I was there, Victoria was, I believe, one of the first Australian states to legalize medical cannabis there, in a very, very basic sense, similar to like pre last couple years in New Zealand, where it was difficult to get, but it was still a thing. So that sort of really helped, gave me sort of the mindset to be open towards the idea of cannabis as a medicine, and not just this like forced down your throat, like illegal drug, it's bad, yada yada.
Yes.
Gave me that mindset to have a sort of open view of it, to be able to go into it like clear-headed, not with preconceptions, and sort of the idea that, oh yeah, it's people use this in a way that helps them quite well.
Yes. It's pretty amazing that your parents were into it, because I think that there's so much stigma around using cannabis at all, but even as a medicine, versus buying it illegally, because in New Zealand it is just illegal unless you get it from a doctor. So what sort of medications were you taking for the various conditions, and did you get prescribed cannabis? Did you try it and then go, oh, hey, this works for me, and then go down a medical route? What was your journey?
So I was on anti-anxiety medication when I was quite young. Realized I very much did not like that. And then tried to get off it as much as possible, and was able to develop like coping mechanisms and stuff to survive those sort of younger years when it's not as stressful. You're pretty much just living life.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of I would take painkillers and everything for having joint issues, but that sort of came in later. So around the time when I started to experiment with cannabis for medicinal use, I initially went straight for like, oh, it helps with my anxiety. It helps me sort of calm down at the end of the day. And then I sort of started to realize, oh, it's actually allowing me to sleep a little bit better. It's feel a lot more comfortable when I'm going to sleep, and relaxed, and even get a more restful night's sleep, and not be like a bit tossy turny all night and everything. It sort of but I started off as most young Kiwis do, with sort of being exposed to it through like school and everything.
Sure.
So I had like people around me that were on the on the recreational legal side of it, consuming it in that sense, and that sort of gave me the sort of right circumstance, I guess, to be able to try it for that, and then sort of go from there, and just kept going, I guess.
Yeah, sure. And so your first experience with cannabis was inhalation, and then at some point you went to a doctor and said, I want to get this prescribed. How did that happen?
So I had already been quite into the whole medical thing for a while, and I was initially going to do it a lot earlier than I did end up doing it at, probably around a year or two before I actually ended up going and talking to a doctor. But for me, I always found I tried black market CBD oils before, and for me, it wasn't as great as just flower products. So, but I was always sort of keeping an eye on like the clinics and stuff that were starting to emerge. And I had like emails, and I was getting emails from them. And when they started opening up the whole idea of, oh, we've got flower now, this is something that's allowed to exist in the New Zealand medical market, that's sort of when I started to plan my whole going and speaking to a doctor. And I went through a couple to before, because it's yes, I am 19. It's not there is a lot of things that's not an ideal circumstance to be prescribed cannabis, but yeah, I worked on it and ended up getting to see a pretty good doctor for it, and they filled me in and gave me everything, and were like, oh yeah, you're already pretty prepared for this, so you know what you're sort of looking for.
Yeah, I guess, you were well researched and not completely naive. I guess it was obvious to them that you weren't just seeking, pot
Yeah.
for for cannabis sake. But you did you ever go to your GP first, or did you go straight to clinics?
I had talked with my GP about using it for medical use. At the time, it was sort of it wasn't as well known about the flower and everything, so they didn't really know what to do. They pretty
Right.
much just said, "Oh, just continue doing what you're doing, I guess."
Okay. Gosh.
Like sort of brush it off, because the issue is a lot of our GPs don't really know a whole lot about it. It's a
Correct.
big topic to research, so and a lot of them just don't have the time or the resources to do that. But I actually had a osteopath
Mm-hmm.
that had the same condition as I did, and her I believe it was her sister or something was like a power lifter, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that a lot of people with my condition can't really do,
No.
because the joints don't have enough support to lift weight like
Yes.
that. But she was telling me about how her sister was like experimenting with medical cannabis to help with the condition and everything, and sort of gave me a few like pointers and research points to look into, like places to get that sorted out. But a lot of it was also through just the internet and research.
Sure. And we hear a lot about that too, that word of mouth is a really common and useful way for people to share information, because if someone's been through it, then they can advise others, because often, as you pointed out, the medical profession, unfortunately, are not well educated about this, and it makes it quite hard if a patient goes in and says, "Hey, look, I've done a lot of research. I'd really like to take this," and they're like, "Yeah, I'm not really confident to do that because I don't know enough about it." So I mean, it's an issue globally. We hear that all the time. It's certainly an issue in New Zealand, but it's good that you got to a clinic. But so how was their process in terms of, with your age? I assume, were your parents involved at all in the consultation, or were they happy just to talk to you because it was obvious you'd done a lot of research on your own?
So my parents were never like involved in the conversation, being over 18. It's
Mm-hmm.
when I was initially doing it. But I did go to one clinic at first, and they had a policy against prescribing THC products to people under the age of like 20,
Mm-hmm.
which was a bit of a setback.
Sure.
But luckily, I found a clinic that sort of was able to hear me out a little bit and
Mm-hmm.
understand where I was coming from. From, even though I'm young, I sort of knew what I was talking about, and it was pretty much just a one-on-one conversation of me talking about my previous experience with it, and then them sort of going, okay, so you relatively are experienced in this, what works for you, so the best way for us to do it is what they said is the best way for us to do it is you pretty much try out a bunch of things and then tell
Mm-hmm.
us how these are making you feel, because there's no cut and dry
Absolutely.
method for prescribing cannabis. It's very much dependent on the person. So I did a lot of like experimentation, I guess, with the
Okay.
different products and
Yeah.
found out what worked for me best. But yeah, it
Cool.
was very easy.
And so now you've found a dried flower product that consistently works for you well,
So
or are you still experimenting?
I have a couple.
Yeah.
I mean, they're releasing new ones all the time, so
Mm.
I like to see if different ones work for different things. Because dried flower I find to be a bit more of a well-rounded thing, but yeah, different things still, different flowers still work for different things. So
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of just I don't know. Yeah, experimentation is still a big part, and
Yeah.
I think it probably will always be a big part of medical cannabis. Is
Yeah.
Don't focus on this one thing just because it helps you in this one area, but like broaden your ideas to be like, oh yeah, maybe this thing, and then this strain has these terpenes which can
Yeah.
help a bit better for this condition, yada yada.
Yeah. And how do you inhale? Do you use an inhaler? Do you use a vaporizer, or are you essentially smoking dried flower? What's your method?
So it depends very much for me. Sometimes I prefer a vaporizer.
Mm-hmm.
I find with vaporizers, it can be very specific with the heats and
Yeah.
how it affects me. So I always find that like high heats affect me in one way, low heats affect me in another way, really high heats, sort of do a mix of both. And so sometimes if I'm just wanting to target one thing, I'll go straight to vaporizer, or if I just want something that's a bit quicker and easier, I'll go vaporizer. But I also use bongs and joints and things like that, just because I find they also give that more well-rounded feeling.
Right. Because you'll get, different heats will set off different things, right? So terpenes have a different heat point than cannabinoids. And so I guess if you're experimenting with that as well, that kind of gets interesting. So what's your consistency of use? I assume you'd said earlier about sleeping. So I assume that you use it at night to assist with relaxation and sleeping and all the things that can come with that. How do you use it during the day?
I almost never use it during the day, to be honest. I very occasionally do. It's almost, it's like if you have like if I'm having like a really rough day with either pain, or if I'm having really bad anxiety, because sometimes I do get very bad anxiety during the day. I always say in the anxiety sense, or the relaxation sense of consuming medical cannabis, it's like a medically prescribed like beer at the end of the day, or a glass of wine at the end of the day. It really like sits you back. You can have some time to sort of process and think about everything. It gives you that moment of like peace, I guess.
And that's interesting, right? So there's a large discussion going on, I think, in New Zealand about alcohol and how accessible that is, and actually how damaging that is for our health as we learn more, particularly binge drinking, right? And then that gets compared to, say, cannabis, which is illegal unless you get it on prescription, and how the health benefits would far outweigh potentially any damage that cannabis can do to your health. And so there's a large discussion going on about that all the time. But it's interesting, right? Because in 10 years' time, we might all be saying, wow, look at all that damage we did to ourselves by having just one glass of wine after work, or one beer after work, which leads to 2 or 3 every day, versus maybe just having a nice, relaxing, balanced dried flower to, as you say, just give you some relaxation. I think it's a really interesting thing. And with your generation, is that part of the discussion? Do you think that, your peers feel that way about alcohol versus cannabis or any other substance, or is alcohol still kind of the choice?
Yeah, well, I'm in an interesting position. I mean, I live in Dunedin. I go to Otago University, the very binge drinking heavy university. So binge drinking is still a major thing in my generation. I mean, Otago, the news of Otago is very evident of binge drinking and people at uni in my age range and everything. But I feel like there's a lot more openness to the idea of, someone instead of drinking, they just prefer to smoke, or if instead of drinking, they don't drink at the end of the day, they'll go outside, smoke, and then maybe come and relax with the flatties. Like I sometimes will just go out, medicate, and then just sit in front of the TV with my flatmates, chat, and as if I'm drinking with my flatmates. Some of them may be drinking, and it's very mixed. It's not, there's no stigma to it as much. I feel in my generation there's a lot more acceptance of people prefer this over alcohol, and it's more beneficial for people than alcohol in some circumstances.
And I think also the idea that anyone who's using cannabis is doing so, and particularly dried flower, is doing so to get high, get wasted, or whatever. Talk about that, because what you're saying doesn't sound like you're medicating and then going straight to bed because you've just zonked yourself, right?
Yeah. So I will do like 2 sessions, I guess, over the course of a night. One is very much that relaxation. That's more that, like, it's very low end. I'm not consuming very much. It's sort of just that allow my brain and my all that pent up stress and energy throughout the day to sort of just calm down and
Yeah.
get me ready for like it's nighttime now,
Yeah.
essentially. And then I will go out again and then consume cannabis to put me into sort of a space where I'll go lie down and go to sleep. Or sometimes I will just do them in one, and I'll go out, smoke, and then sit with my flatmates for like 10 minutes, half an hour, and then go off to bed and sleep. It sort of just depends on the day, I guess, for me.
Yeah, sure. Interesting. And have you got other friends using medicinal cannabis? So not, well, there's two things maybe. Using cannabis that they might buy from the black market to treat things. So using it medicinally, but not gaining it medicinally, or friends who are also getting prescription cannabis to use.
No, I'm pretty alone among my friend group. I know of friends that from outside, you can an outsider's perspective, you can definitely tell that it's gotten to a point of very like self-medicating sort of behavior.
Sure.
They're not just smoking to get high, but they're having a similar sort of thing to me. Of it's like a relaxation-y sort of just calming, just a way to cool down. But I mean, a lot of my generation also tends to have quite a lot of mental health issues, and then unintentionally end up self-prescribing and in almost a medical sense consuming cannabis.
Yes.
To help with that, because that's quite common. But I have friends that smoke, but none medically.
Right. Sure. So roughly, and you don't have to share this if you don't want to, but I'm interested. Roughly, how much cannabis are you going through, say, in a month?
For me, I'm probably on the low end of well, I have been told that I'm probably average, but I always think I'm on the low end. A month, probably just under 10 grams. So
a month? Oh,
a month.
I would say that is on the low end.
Yeah. So I am very much more of on the low end. Yeah. I mean, I know people that are consuming that in about 2 weeks or 2 days sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for like that in like relaxation-y sort of thing, just a little bit is all I need, and having stronger flower as well.
Yes,
Works
right.
a little bit better.
Sure. And so you have noticed a difference in the product. So as you say, there are new varieties that come out as they get verified to meet the minimum quality standard in New Zealand. And in New Zealand, we don't really have anything above about 22, 23 might be the highest percentage THC flower. But do you notice a difference in the higher THC versus lower? But also there's a discussion also around, well, you don't have to have super high THC if you have a really strong terpene profile. And so you could have something that's 15%, but let's say with 3 or 4% terpenes, and you're going to get a different but as equally as effective impact. Have you noticed that between the varieties that you've been able to try in New Zealand?
Yeah. So I mean, any people who know of me before this will probably know the product I'm talking about without me naming it. But I have one that I still really love. And I think it works a bit better if I for the times when I do have to use it during the day, having that lower percentage, but having that really high and useful terpene profile as well. It's got a vast terpene profile. And then the one I'm currently using is a bit more of that like heavy hitting sort of one, but it's I find the circumstances to be like if I want something a bit more that I can function on relatively well throughout the day, I go lower and higher. But the terpene profile between a lot of the products available at the moment is amazing. It's very extensive and very great for pretty much a lot of my issues. So
good.
I can sort of I have my pick of everything.
Okay, awesome. And do you still take any other medication for your joints or for your mental health or anything like that, or is it just cannabis?
Just cannabis.
Right.
Yeah.
That must be Well, some people say it's a relief to come off a vast amount of drugs that they don't really feel very well on. What was your experience?
Yeah, I just hated, especially mental health stuff. I don't like how they affect the way you sort of. I felt more hazy actually.
Sure.
On a lot of mental health substances, I felt very un-me. Like I sort of felt more in that sense of like how a lot of people explain cannabis, like very uh, uh, distant and withdrawn from what's actually happening around me. And then, I mean, a lot of people take painkillers lots. A lot of people can relate to the whole issue of it's a hassle to, and then to take painkillers all the time. But then it's also incredibly addictive for a lot of painkillers as well, and a lot of people. And you sort of start to notice that you start getting pains that you didn't have before when you start
Yeah.
coming off painkillers and stuff. So having something that's a bit more just like single, well-rounded is great for just convenience. But the coming off like a lot of these different drugs, which are more recognized in a medical sense, but I felt had a bit more harm for me, was probably the beneficial part, was the better sort of quality of treatment that I felt like I was getting from cannabis.
Yeah. So I mentioned at the start that your nom de plume is the Green Baron, and you've been starting to create content yourself about your journey and about cannabis. So how did that start, and where do you want to take that?
The way it started was I pretty much I did my consultation for getting my prescription. Came back on a positive side of like, yeah, I got prescribed. And then just had my camera lying next to me. Didn't have anything to do for the next half hour, and was like, why don't I just film a video? Filmed this video, uploaded it to a channel I just created in like 5 minutes, and then posted it on the medical cannabis subreddit, which is really useful for information. But yeah, I just chucked it up there, and a lot of people seem to like it, so I just kept going.
Oh.
And then for where I want to take it, I'm not too sure. I feel like as I do more and more stuff, I start to run out of a lot of things to talk about. But I want to sort of not just have it as like a space for entertainment, but also like an information center as well, and like a place for people to feel comfortable with like hearing someone who's not just a doctor, or someone who's not just a super highly educated throwing big words at you all the time kind of person, but someone who is like the viewer is someone who they can relate to and feel more connected to. And then especially with people who may be new to it and might just stumble across my content, they might see it as like a eye-opening experience to open them up to the idea of maybe the medical cannabis might work for them, or they might know a loved one that it could help with as well. But just like pretty much sharing the information, because very, very, very difficult to find information.
It is,
at the
right?
moment.
It
Yeah.
is. And exactly why why I really wanted to do this series, because we get emails every day from people, how do I get product? My doctor said it's illegal. What do I do? It's not even, there's no information. There's a whole bunch of misinformation. And so we've got that. And then also the stigma, right? You personally don't seem to feel that there is a stigma around this. You've been very proactive in managing your own health and going and finding it because you know that it was going to be a positive thing for you. But there's so many people out there who really want to try this because they do believe it will help them or help a family member, and they're just terrified that other people will find out. What's your advice for them? And have you suffered any stigma at all? And how do we help these people overcome the stigma?
I mean, I've definitely suffered stigma, not just for just the fact that I smoke cannabis, but like I have dreadlocks. I have I very much look like the stoner kid from high school.
Yeah.
And I guess I sort of got the like in a lot more when I was younger, but it's as I've gotten, I'm in uni, everyone's very accepting and a bit different.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stigmas that just go out the window throughout the uni years. But I know among some of my, especially more like conservative older family, sort of have that stigma to them as well. And then I have family members that I've talked to about it and have said, well, you should, who've tried other medicines and stuff, and to less of an avail. And I've suggested, why not look into this a little bit? And yeah, they, especially within their like communities of like older age, from probably I don't want to say what I think of at older ages, because
It's okay. It's okay. You won't offend me.
Probably well, older than me, let's just say older than me, like post uni years, I guess, the sort of communities and friendships you're in, a lot of them will have people who have that stigma again of like lazy stoner, or
absolutely,
cannabis makes you lazy and not efficient, dumbs you down and everything. So but I had that from family when I was younger, especially of why are you doing this, because you're gonna regret it later in life. And I'm like, well, I'd rather live in the now than have to just worry about what I'm going to think about later in life. Because if I had to do that, then I would be choosing to just sit in my room all day and do absolutely nothing, and then lose all these fun experiences.
Yeah, and suffer from pain, anxiety, depression, and anything else that brings. I mean, that's a dark hole, right?
I've definitely been in some dark places through that, and especially over the last like 2 years, man, it was rough. I mean, I'm from Auckland originally, so I was stuck in my house for 6 months at a time. Which sucks, but it definitely pushed me into places in my head that I definitely did not want to be in. You
said earlier, lots of your peers and your generation have the same issue. And do you think that COVID really brought all the lockdowns and 2 years of weirdness that we had? Do you think that really pushed people into dark places?
I feel like not just with my generation. I think my generation was already relatively aware of a lot of mental health issues. That we were raised with that heavily in school. But I think COVID, the interesting part about COVID is it sort of pushed a lot of older generations who might not have been more as knowledgeable or accepting to information about mental health, to sort of realize that this was an issue that they were facing, and they could seek help, and it was something that wasn't just like a them thing, but there were other people. And I think that having this so much time kept to yourself, you sort of start to realize that maybe I'm just trying to distract myself with all these things. Or I know a lot of binge drinking went up with people throughout lockdowns and everything, because they were just trying to distract their brain pretty much from feeling what they were feeling, because it was very lonely. And I mean, I was lucky enough to be with family, but a lot of people maybe only had one other person, or like maybe they were by themselves, and that would be pretty rough. So you sort of understand how that sort of comes out more.
Well, look, I'm very pleased that you seem very very happy and very well rounded today, and it is great that you're not having to fill yourself with a bunch of chemicals that don't work for you. I think when we initially spoke, you said you felt like a zombie, and that's a very common thing, and it's amazing that one plant substance can meet all these different needs, right? And that's what I love about cannabis as medicine, is that with all the things that travel in a pack, like you said, anxiety or depression and joint pain, and therefore I can't relax, and therefore I can't sleep, and therefore I can't function very well. Just generally, they all build up on each other, right? And it's an amazing medicine that can actually deal with parts of all of those things so that you can function and be healthy. The laws in New Zealand, as you know, are that you can obviously legally get it through prescription, but other than that, it's illegal. And there's been lots of talk, obviously, over the years of decriminalization and legalization. We've had a referendum which was, voted against to legalize adult use. So, what are your views on, if you could wave a magic wand and ask the government for one thing in terms of a change, and it may not be legalization, but what do you think needs to happen politically for this to move forward?
Well, I definitely think that to drop the stigma of cannabis as much, I think legalization should be something that we need to look into, because a lot of people are content with taking regular prescription medicines, and that's fine. But if you open up to the rest of New Zealand to be a lot more open about their cannabis consumption, it might allow more people to sort of start seeing it in different lights. I mean, we have very little stigma over drinking just because it's legal, but if it was illegal, we would be pretty much evaluating drinking to probably worse than cannabis. So legalization to help people who need cannabis or could benefit a lot from cannabis, I think, is the biggest thing. It's creating this healthy environment for industry and in a community to grow a bit more than what's already sort of beginning to develop. The medical community is very welcoming and open to everybody, so I feel like if we had that increase from a recreational side as well, we would get a lot more information share, spread, everything would be a bit more out there and people would be a bit more comfortable with being out there.
Less of a, well, not secret, but kind of semi-secret society, right? Which is sometimes what it feels like. And I'm sure for those who use the Reddit subthreads and stuff, which you're right, there's some great stuff there, and people have really started those to do exactly that, to share information and to really help people who are wanting to use medicinal cannabis, right? There's some great information out there because often people just don't know where to go. But you're right, it still feels like it's buried. Like you have to go looking for it. It's not hard, but it's not necessarily just out there. And yeah, I think I'm always interested to see how the stigma goes, because again, it's kind of like, someone hates something or thinks badly of something until they try it themselves, and then often their minds can be changed. And it's the same with, none of my relatives would smoke cannabis. That's an awful thing to do. And then all of a sudden someone is in a situation where medical cannabis helps them because they have cancer, or and I'm not saying it cures cancer. It more it helps with the side effects of chemotherapy, let's say. And then you kind of go, I was wrong about that. It's good. And so, we don't necessarily want people talking about how they're suffering from horrendous diseases all the time, but unfortunately that's kind of what it takes, right? And that's why I'm very appreciative of your time and your story, because this is exactly it, that other people are doing this and other people are normal. It's normal people doing this, right? It's not just stoners. And I don't think you're a stoner. I
definitely look it.
Well, I've seen worse. But you know what I mean? It's not just about getting the stereotypical stoner kind of persona. Anyone who takes medicinal cannabis is not a stoner. I take medicinal cannabis, right? I probably don't look like your average stoner. Professional, working in a relatively senior position. I'm not a stoner. I use it medically and it helps me. So, that's also why I'm so passionate about people sharing their stories, because I really do believe it can help other people. So again, thanks for your time, Zach. Great to talk to you. Remind us of where we can find your content online.
For YouTube, you can go The Green Baron you can just search The Green Baron on YouTube. Baron with one R. Sometimes I have to put two because people take the green Baron often. Or you can pretty much search up medical cannabis NZ, scroll down a little bit, you'll see my face before I dreadlocked my hair. And I also stream on Twitch if you're interested in, I don't know, a little bit more of like a live interacty sort of thing with me.
Okay. Cool.
I love to talk to everybody. So
awesome. Well, thanks again. Really appreciate your time and glad to see you so well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Please feel free to send feedback and questions to devilslettuce@helios.com. You can download the podcast on the Apple Store and also on Spotify. This podcast has been brought to you by Helios Therapeutics. Thanks also to the EMA for their assistance in enabling me to do this, and producer Jason.